Welcome to Binge Breakthrough, the podcast designed to help you finally break through the barriers that keep you stuck, feeling out of control around food. I'm Master Certified Coach Jane Pilger, and I want you to know that no matter how long you've been struggling or what you've tried, food freedom is possible, and I'm here to show you how. After years of therapy, eating disorders treatment, restrictive diets, and reading all the books, I was still stuck in the on-again, off-again cycle of restricting and binging until I was able to see it all from a new perspective that changed everything. Each week, I will share the strategies, tools, and mindset that allowed me to overcome my decades-long battle with binge eating. Your journey to body trust starts now. Let's dive in. Hello, trusted listener. Welcome to Binge Breakthrough. I consider you a trusted listener because I trust that you are going to hear something today that is insightful and impactful on your journey with food, or perhaps on your loved one's journey with food, because this week's episode is specifically for loved ones of people who are struggling with binge eating. Now, it could be struggling with binge eating or struggling with food in any way. There aren't a lot of resources out there for people who are supporting someone who is on the journey with food. And so I wanted to create this podcast episode to provide some support, some ideas for you. I have a client whose husband is so supportive of her journey to end binge eating, and he wants to do anything he can to help her. But he also doesn't really understand this whole area, and he wants to make sure that he isn't doing something that might unintentionally be harmful for her. He listens to every episode of this podcast just to understand what's happening for his wife. And he has no personal experience with binge eating or body image concerns. So this is all very foreign for him, but he really wants to do anything to support his wife. Now, I've been able to have conversations with him directly and also with he and his wife together to talk about strategies and ways to navigate challenging situations. And during our last conversation, I was actually inspired to record this podcast episode to help any other partners of someone who is currently navigating binge eating or just food and body obsession in general. And then I realized, you know what? I want to make this episode even more inclusive. This isn't just for partners. It's for any loved one who is supporting someone who binges, who is struggling, who has pain around food, whether that's a partner, a family member, or a dear friend. Now, before I move on, I want to say I will be giving some examples of my own experience with my husband through this and the support that I had and still have to this day from him. And I want to say it is a privilege to have a loving partner who wants to support you through this. And not everyone has this in their life. So if you do have a loving and supportive partner, or you have a loving and supportive loved one, whether it's a family member, whether it is a friend, a therapist, a coach, someone that you can talk to about your food challenges, take a moment and recognize it. And just get curious about what role, if any, you want that loved one to play in your journey to more peace with food. This really is going to be a relationship that you co-create together. If you are the loved one, you can't make the person who is struggling with food, you can't make them do anything. You literally cannot control what they say, what they tell you, what they don't tell you, what sort of relationship the two of you have together, but you can decide together. Here's who I want to be for you. And here's who I would love for you to be for me. Now, it may not always show up that way, but you can co-create this together through open, vulnerable conversation. And it's my hope that this podcast will at least be a start for this discussion and this communication between the two of you. Now, if you are a person who has a partner or you have a loved one of any sort of loved one who is loving and supportive, but this loved one doesn't really know about your eating struggles, I invite you to check out episode 35 of this podcast. I will link to it in the show notes. It's called How to Talk to Your Loved Ones About Your Secret Eating. And in that episode, I walk you through the decision of whether or not to talk to your loved ones. And I walk you through the process. It is a decision of whether or not you want to share. If you are listening to this and you are the person who is struggling with food and you are thinking, oh, I have not talked to anyone about my eating, I want you to know it is very normal. I was married before I ever opened up to my husband about my binging, and it was a very, very challenging thing for me. I was so convinced he would not love me. Now, spoiler alert, that did not end up to be the case, but I had so much shame about my behavior. It was very hard for me to open up to anyone else. So if you are that person and you have not yet opened up to anyone, I invite you to listen to that episode. I think it will be very helpful for you to just decide, do I want to do this? And if you decide you want to, I walk you through what you can do and how you can have that conversation. Now, if you are in a situation where you are now talking to someone, a loved one, about your food struggles, the rest of this episode is for you, and specifically it's for the loved one. Things I want the loved one to take away. So I've compiled a few tips, a few kind of main takeaways that as a loved one, I really would love for you to know as you support your loved one through their food struggles. And I've also given answering a few questions that I frequently get that I think it's possible you might have. All right, so let's dive in. So the three main takeaways, the three main points I really want you as a loved one to know. This is not your fault, and it's not about you. You may have to remind yourself this. This may be something that you have to remind yourself over and over again. I remember that my husband would often think that my binging was his fault. He also had a lot of thoughts that, he would think that I was choosing food over him. Let's say, for example, it happened many times that we might have had a date night planned, or we might have had plans to go out with friends. And during the day, I would end up binging, and he would come home and he would be excited about whatever it was we were supposed to do. And I would say, sorry, I'm not going out. I binged. I feel awful. There's no way I could go anywhere. There's no way I could see anybody. I'm not going to go. And so he would think, you're choosing food over me. You making that choice to eat food today was you intentionally choosing food over me. And I would tell him, I get it. I understand how it feels that way. But in that moment when I am eating, quite honestly, the last thing that I was thinking about was him. I was not thinking about him. I was not thinking I'm choosing this over him. I really wasn't thinking at all. I was in that lights off, disconnected. This is what I'm doing. I was not thinking about him. And it was not easy for him to hear that, but it was true. And now, I didn't even have this language before, but now that I know so much more about the nervous system, I understand that the logical brain isn't on board very much in the middle of a binge. So not only is it that I'm not thinking about my husband, I don't really even have the capacity sometimes in that moment to do it, but I'm not thinking about anything other than the one thing that my brain thinks will get me out of danger, which is food. So you may have often have the thought as the supportive loved one that it's your fault. And you might just need to remind yourself multiple times that this has nothing to do with you. Now, if you're a parent with a child struggling with binge eating, you may also have the thought, this is my fault. There are many factors that lead someone to develop binge eating, and it is never anyone's fault. Here's what I want you to really hear. Thinking that it's your fault, whether you're a parent, whether you are a family member, whether you are a partner, thinking it's your fault, it won't put you in the best place to support them through this journey. It will heighten your own nervous system, and you won't be able to show up in the most helpful way for them or for yourself. Now, if you're a partner or if you're a friend, it's also helpful to remember that your loved one, the one who is struggling with food, who's struggling through this challenging time with binge eating or food obsession, whatever it is very likely that your loved one has been struggling with food, with body, with all of this stuff long before you came along. So reminding yourself of this can really give you reassurance that it isn't you. And if you are the parent who has been with the child through this whole journey, it's also important to remind you yourself, there is no way to know what causes binge eating. There are so many factors, and it is never anybody's fault. Just remember, I want to be as supportive as possible. That's my job here. All right, so that is the point number one. I really want you to hear. This is not your fault, and it's not about you. Point number two, the path is not linear. There will be progress, and there will be times that don't look like progress. This is true in any endeavor. This is true in any goal, in anything we want to achieve in life. And it is especially true in the relationship with food and healing a lifetime or decades of food struggles. It is 100% possible, but it is not linear. It is not a straight line. There will be good days and there will be challenging days. So it's so common to think, oh, I thought they had it figured out, or they were doing so well, and now look at this. I'm going to have a future podcast episode, should be coming out soon, about I thought I had it figured out. So you can listen to that with your loved one and go through this and really understand this on a deeper level. But just for now, just know that this path to recovery, this progress never looks like a straight line. So what you can do is help your loved one by noticing progress. It's very important to notice our progress. The value of incremental progress is so important in this journey. I will also link in the show notes to a previous episode about the value of incremental progress. So you can point things out to your loved one that you see that may not be obvious to them. So my husband, when I would tell him what I had eaten for a long time, I mean, here's some progress. Number one, I would not even tell him what I had eaten or how much I had eaten. Then I very slowly started to tell him what I had eaten, but I didn't really kind of tell him amounts. Then we kind of realized, oh, if I actually could talk to him about the amounts and say them out loud, it really helped in my, it helped in the shame resilience, in actually being able to talk about it. So at some point, it took some time. This was a progress, but at some point I got to the point where we just decided together, I committed, I will not hide food from you. I will not lie about what I've eaten or how much I've eaten. Now, I There were so many times I didn't actually want to tell him, but when he would ask in a very gentle and loving and supportive way, I would tell him. Now, we decided this together. This was not him policing my intake. This was not him saying, what did you eat? You have to tell me. This was a decision that together we made. I am not suggesting that this is the right decision for anybody else. You really, with your loved one, will need to decide what are the things that you want to talk about. What are the things that maybe you don't want to talk about. But as this progressed, number one, we could see progress in, wow, look at this. You're actually volunteering to tell me what you ate instead of me kind of very gently asking you the question that we have agreed that I can ask. Then it would turn into, as I would tell him over time, he'd be like, wow, okay, like I can understand that, but that's a lot less than you used to eat. And I would be so in the, well, yeah, but I binged. So thinking that was a failure, I couldn't even see the fact that I actually ate less food. I stopped sooner. It didn't last and go on for hours and hours and hours. The fact that I even opened up to him sooner, those were all areas of progress that I couldn't see because I was in my shame. I was in my disappointment. I was in my frustration, but he was able to point those things out for me. So that was really helpful. If you are a friend, one of the things you can do, again, it's so important with whoever your loved one is, whatever relationship you have with them, it's important for you to have conversations when you are both in a connected and grounded place to talk about what you want to talk about, what topics are on the table. What do you not want to talk about? Establish expectations. Really set some guidelines, some expectations. What is okay? What isn't okay? I will also share in the show notes a podcast episode where I talk to my best friend. It's called Insights from a Friend. I talked to my best friend. We talked about really my journey of what it looked like. There was a long time I would not tell her that I was binging. We decided on an emoji. I would send her an emoji if I was binging. Instead of me just ghosting her for 3 days, I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't ready to even use any words, but we agreed I could send her an emoji and she would know that meant things were not going well. So that was how we started. Then it got to the place where not only was I willing to talk to her about it, I would literally get onto Marco Polo, which is like a voice recording app. I would get onto Marco Polo right after I would be done binging. And I would talk to her and say, oh, okay, here's what happened here. And I would walk through the whole thing. So we went from ghosting for days to an emoji to eventually me being able to tell her so many things. So this is progress over time. So you can look for and you can celebrate progress together. Point number 2 is the path is not linear. Point number 3, this is so important. Whatever your role is as the loved one, it is not your job to fix them. It's your job to support them. Now, it's your job if you choose to accept it. You don't have to support them, but because this is for loved ones, my guess is you really love this human who is in a lot of pain around food. You want to support them, but it is not your job to fix them. Now, my biggest advice, do not let yourself get into a situation where you are holding the other person accountable. Some people like to have their partner hold them accountable to what they said they were going to eat. So this might sound like, hey, we're going to the restaurant tonight and I'm not going to eat any bread. So make sure that I don't. Make sure that I don't order dessert, or ask me later how much I ate. Something like that. That's a no. You are not here to be the food police. You are not. I can promise you, even if they tell you, yes, please in advance. If I order something from the restaurant that you think I'm going to regret later, I want you to ask me, are you sure? Are you sure you want that? If you were to do that, in that moment, I can guarantee you they're not going to be like, oh, thank you so much for asking that question. No, that is not how they are going to perceive it. So if they ask you to hold them accountable, to not let you eat something or order something or whatever, gently and firmly say, no, that is not my job. I am not here to be your food police. Now, I can talk to you about it. I can ask some questions, how'd it go, whatever the questions are, but your job isn't to fix them or to police them. Now, if you do want to ask them questions, my best advice for you is in advance, have the conversation. What questions would you like to hear from me? What would feel supportive? Questions that you might think would be supportive might come across as judgmental. Here's what I can promise you. If your loved one has eaten in a way that they don't care for, that they feel shame or judgment or frustration or disappointment about, and you ask a question about it, they may very well take that as you're doing the interpretation that you're doing something wrong. You made a wrong choice because they are thinking that themselves. So be very careful in how you ask the question. And the best thing you can do is just ask them, not in the moment. In the moment after they've eaten in that way is not the time to ask them. It's when you're calm and you're connected and there is not food drama taking place. You have these conversations in advance. What would be supportive? What questions would you like to hear from me in that moment? After you have these conversations, then you can say, hey, how did that go for you? Is there something else you would have liked to hear? Then you can adjust, you can adapt. The best thing you can do for your loved one is to love them, to support them, and to try to understand what they are going through. You are going to have your own reactions and your own nervous system response to their pain, to their challenges. And it's very likely that it would be helpful for you to seek your own support for this, your own outside support. It is challenging to support someone else who is going through a really hard time. They can't really be that support for you because they have their own thing that they're working through. My husband kept his frustrations inside for a long time, and he didn't want to upset me, and he didn't want to say something that would cause me to go binge. So he really didn't share for a long time how painful it was for him. But once he started opening up and he started sharing that with me, it was really important for me to hear because it helped me realize I was not the only one who was impacted by the behavior. Acknowledging his pain while also acknowledging my own was very important for us together. But this can be really challenging to do without getting into blame. When we did it, when we were able to get there, it wasn't this is your fault. It was this is hard. This is what it's like for me. So we could kind of both get to this place of this is what it's like for me. This pain is real for both of us. All right. Those are the three main takeaways. Number one, this is not your fault and it's not about you. Number two, the path is not linear. There will be progress and there will be times that don't look like progress. Number three, it is not your job to fix them. It is your job to support them. All right, I want to dive into a few additional questions because these takeaways, they provide a great foundation for understanding and support. But you might still have some specific questions about how to handle certain situations. So let's address some common questions that I get asked by loved ones. Question number 1, how do you support someone in the moment if you see that a binge or a disconnect with the body is happening? So in this case, going back to what I said before, ask them ahead of time. If you know this happens sometimes, particularly if you're living in the same house, whether you're a family member, whether you're a partner, ask them ahead of time, what do you want to hear? If I see this happening, what would you want to hear? What would you want me to say? Because remember, in the moment that it's happening, if your loved one you kind of see them going towards it, let's say you see them and let's say they're binging, they are eating. In that moment, their nervous system is very likely detecting a threat and their logical brain is probably not on board. So you are not going to have just this great logical conversation. Oh, hey, look, I noticed you're eating the chips. If you were to say that and comment on what they are doing, they are going to hear this as you are doing something wrong. They are going to interpret it as pointing the finger. You should not be doing that. So we want to be really careful about this. So their nervous system is likely detecting a threat, which has them going to the food. Now notice your own nervous system. So what's happening for you? There might be tightness. You might be feeling frustration. You might be feeling some anger. You might notice some warmth in your body. What I suggest that you do, you and your partner, again, ahead of time, come up with a code word. Something that's going to put the emphasis on what the body is feeling versus the behavior. And a very neutral code word. Here's an example. This is an example I was telling a client about the other day. You could use the code word hummingbird. Hummingbird might be a great word for you because if you are eating from this place of you have a very high activation in your nervous system, sometimes it can kind of feel like a hummingbird, right? It's like zzz, you're almost buzzing with so much energy. So that could be very reflective of what's happening for you internally. So then as a loved one, partner, family member, even a friend, it's oh, wow, seems like maybe there's some hummingbird energy going on, something like that, right? So what this does is, number 1, is it's not saying hey, you must be really freaked out. It's also not putting the emphasis on the behavior. Well, look at you eating a bunch of food right now. It's the emphasis is on what the body is experiencing. So together you can come up with a code word, really takes the temperature down on all of it. But again, have this conversation ahead of time, not in the moment. All right, here's the next question. What are some helpful things to say if your loved one comes to you and says they had a binge? Here's just some basic answers for you. Tell me about it. Help me understand. What was that like for you? How can I support you through this? And what do you need? Simple questions. You don't need to say a lot of words. You don't need to fix it. Remember, it's not your job to fix. But if you just say, tell me about it. Help me understand. What was that like for you? How can I support you through this? And what do you need? That's all you need to say. Let them go from the rest. And just remember, you don't have to fix it. And then notice, as you ask these questions, notice which questions are helpful, which ones seem supportive, which ones do they respond better to, and which ones do they kind of get maybe defensive about or shut down. Each person is going to be individual in the questions and the response. So really, this is about you connecting and getting to know what they need. These are great starting points. Tell me about it. Help me understand. What was that like for you? And how can I support you through this? And what do you need? All right. So parents might ask, how can I support my child without being overprotective or controlling? My basic advice for you is this: seek professional guidance. Don't try to do this alone. If you are being controlling and overprotective, your child is going to feel the energy of that, and they may end up rebelling against that really tight energy as a result. You are both going to need your own support through this process. The nervous system is such an integral part of this process, and it's very important that you and your child both have ways to regulate your nervous systems, because you might both kind of unintentionally be activating each other's nervous systems, which will then just lead them more towards the food until they have other tools and resources available to them for that. All right, so friends might ask, how do I balance being supportive with maintaining healthy boundaries in our friendship? So really here, it's having conversations when you're both grounded and connected about what would be helpful. And this is not just for friends. This is for no matter what relationship you have with your loved ones. Do it when you're grounded and connected ahead of time. What would be helpful? Be open and honest about what is challenging. It was open, honest, grounded conversation with my best friend that led to the emoji to start. And then we kept going from there. But decide what you will accept and what you won't, and communicate it. With my best friend, it was okay for me to just disappear for 3 days. Now, she worried, but there was never a time where she was like, well, if you don't respond, then we just can't be friends. That wasn't the case. But for some people, that may not be okay for some people. So you will have to decide what is okay for you and what isn't okay for you. But remember, your loved one's response, the one who is going through this pain with food, it is never intentional, and it is not about you. When I ghosted my best friend for 3 days, it was not enough. It had zero to do with her. It was all my shame. But you, as the loved one, you get to decide what is and isn't okay for you. But open communication is the key. Last question. How can you have a healthy discussion where the focus is not on food? So I had a partner ask me this question, and this partner said, I just notice a lot of times that our conversation just goes to food. It's kind of like, it's different for me. It's unusual. And I really would love to talk about other things. So if you notice the focus of conversation being on food a lot, you can gently ask to switch topics. Now, we don't want to do it in a way that feels judgy or like it's bad or wrong to do that. The state of both of your nervous systems is important, always, but particularly in this type of situation. When you are feeling connected and things appear more calm and relaxed between both of you, you can bring it up in advance before you're in the middle of it. You could say, I notice we talk a lot about food. And you could ask, is their mental space occupied by food? Or maybe you know that it is. You could ask questions like, what do you suppose we might talk about if we didn't talk about food? What would you like to be thinking about if you weren't thinking about food all the time? Couple of gentle curiosity questions that we can kind of bring something up and just see where it goes. Not from a place of trying to change the behavior, but trying to understand and trying to be curious about it. All right, as we wrap up, I really want to emphasize the importance of caring for yourself. Going through recovery for any sort of eating challenge is difficult. Supporting someone who is going through pain and struggles with food is difficult. It is very important for you to maintain your own mental, emotional, and physical health. It's very important. So you might consider seeking support, finding someone where you can have your own space to process what's coming up for you. Remember any sort of stress management techniques for yourself, whether it's movement, meditation, hobbies, things that you like to do, things that help you stay grounded and better equipped to offer support. Also know it's totally okay to set boundaries. But if you do, just communicate them about what you can and can't do to support them. And remember, any sort of communication with your loved one is going to be done best ahead of time when you are both grounded and connected. You can also educate yourself, which my client's partner is doing so beautifully by listening to this podcast. You can learn about binge eating. You can learn about other food struggles, but don't become obsessed. Remember, you are not expected to be an expert, and it is not your job to fix. You are here to support. You are here to understand. And lastly, self-compassion. It's so important for your loved one who is going through these food struggles, and it's so important for yourself too. Supporting someone through their food challenges can be difficult, and it's normal to feel frustrated and to feel helpless at times. But I also want to let you know this recovery and healing is fully possible. I just know that my husband, there were so many times where he felt frustrated, he felt helpless. I am certain that he could not have imagined a day that is like what we experience now. Recovery is possible. These challenges, these frustrations, they do not have to continue forever and ever. There exists a future for both of you where food is not the focus. It is not the obsession. It is not painful. Where you have peace around food, where you have connection with yourselves, with each other. That future does exist. Hold on to that vision while you go through the challenges. All right. Summary. This is not your fault. It is not about you. The path is not linear, and it is not your job to fix them. It's your job to support them. All types of supportive relationships are so valuable in the recovery process. I will tell you, for myself, nothing has actually helped me more than the more I have been able to talk about my challenges, the more the shame has subsided. But you do have to find the right people to share with. I have shared with some people and it's been like, oh, that was not the right person. That just kind of fell on deaf ears. But having supportive loved ones along this journey with you is so powerful. If you don't have that in your life, you can find that through other sources. You can find it through groups. Our Cultivate group coaching program is a place where we have this group of incredibly supportive, understanding people who get what it's like, who are led by me, who gets what it's like, who is constantly learning and going through these processes so that we can all grow together. And through my one-on-one coaching, my private coaching, I work with clients and I also work with their loved ones. One of the most unique things we do is my husband is also available for special calls to speak from his personal perspective as someone who deeply knows what it's like to try to support someone through a challenging time and to get through and be on the other side of it. So if you would like support for yourself or your loved one, schedule a food freedom session with me today and we can talk deeper on what that might look like. All right. I hope this was helpful. That's what I have for you today, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Binge Breakthrough. You can find the show notes and any resources mentioned at bingebreakthrough.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to have future episodes delivered to you each Wednesday. And remember, your 5-star rating and review will help others discover these life-changing concepts. See you next week.